In this video, we will look at every woman who has been executed in the United States, in the state of Oklahoma. We'll walk through the crimes that put them on death row, the final words they spoke, and the last meals they requested before facing execution. But before we start, let us know in the comments where you are watching this from. After spending 12 years on death row, Wanda Jean Allen was executed by lethal injection in Oklahoma. But to understand how she ended up on death row in the first place, we have to go back to the winter of 1988, where a relationship finally hit its breaking point, right outside the front doors of a small-town police department. Wanda Jean and Gloria Jean Leathers had been inseparable once. They met behind prison walls and, once released, tried to build a life together. But what started as companionship quickly turned toxic. By the time they were living under the same roof, the relationship had become violent. And on a cold Thursday afternoon, Gloria was done. She wanted out, this time for good. It started inside a grocery store. The two had walked in together, but tension was already building. Gloria had picked up her welfare check, and Wanda Jean wanted the money, even demanded it. Their loud voices turned to shouting, and eventually someone called the police. When officers arrived, Gloria was done pretending. She asked one of them to escort her back to the house so she could pack her things and leave. She told them she was moving out, going back to her mother's. She was done with the fighting, and done with Wanda Jean. Back at the house, things stayed civil, at least on the surface. The officer waited as Gloria gathered her belongings and made a quick phone call to her mom to ask for a ride. She ignored the looks Wanda Jean was giving her across the room. Wanda just stood there, watching, until she finally muttered something under her breath. "If I can't have you, no one will." Gloria didn't respond, and a few minutes later, her mother pulled into the driveway. Together, they loaded the last of her things into the car, and it looked like Gloria was finally free. But before heading home, she made one last decision. She didn't just want to leave, she wanted to make a report. So they turned the car around and drove straight to the police station. But what they didn't know was that Wanda Jean was right behind them. She had gotten into her own car and followed, quiet and calculated, never getting too close, but never losing sight either. When they reached the station, Gloria opened the door and stepped out, walking toward the front entrance, but she only made it a few steps. Wanda Jean pulled in behind them, got out, and raised a gun. She didn't hesitate and pulled the trigger. One shot right into Gloria's stomach, and she immediately collapsed on the concrete. Inside the building, two officers heard the shot and sprinted toward the front doors, and what they found outside was chaos. Gloria bleeding out on the pavement, her mother screaming for help, and Wanda Jean already speeding off in her car with the gun still in her hand. But Gloria wasn't gone yet. She was still breathing and was able to say who pulled the trigger. Her mother filled in the rest. It all had happened in broad daylight, right on the police department's front steps. For the next 4 days, Gloria hovered between life and death. Doctors tried everything they could, but the damage inside her abdomen was just too much. Meanwhile, Wanda Jean had disappeared. For 4 days, no one could find her. But she didn't disappear forever. An anonymous tip finally came in, and she was hiding out 70 miles outside of Oklahoma City, and the police moved in quickly. When they arrested her, they found the .38 revolver stashed nearby, the same one that had torn Gloria's life apart in a split second. And Wanda Jean was charged with shooting with intent to kill. But that wouldn't last long. Just 2 hours after the arrest, Gloria Jean Leathers died. She was just 29 years old. And with that, everything changed. The shooting became a homicide, and the story behind it, the why, the who, the how, wasn't as simple as it looked. Not when investigators traced it back and looked at Wanda Jean's life. Most days, Wanda Jean took it upon herself to keep the rest of the family fed. When there wasn't enough to go around, she stole cash, food, and whatever she could carry. And it didn't take long for the police to learn her name. And that was not it. At 12, she got hit by a truck and was knocked unconscious. And at 14, she was stabbed in the head. No one ever ran any tests to figure out what kind of long-term damage those injuries left behind, but she never quite seemed to think like other kids. A psychologist eventually did see her at 15 and found signs of an intellectual disability, with an IQ hovering around 69, and urged a full neurological workup. But that never happened, and she slipped through the cracks like so many others. After dropping out, she stole and got arrested more than once, and by the time she was 21, she had a record, a temper, and a gun. Her first victim was someone she knew well, Deidre Pettis. They had grown up together, lived together as roommates, and at one point, they were even more than friends. But by summer of 1981, something in their bond had changed. On June 29th, Wanda Jean told the police she had fired in self-defense, that Deidre's boyfriend had pulled a gun, and she had shot back. She said she stood 30 feet away when the bullet flew and that Deidre had just been in the wrong place. But the autopsy told a different story. She had bruises along her face, and the powder burns on her skin said the shot had come from a close range, too close. Investigators believed she had been pistol-whipped before being shot, not caught in a crossfire, but targeted. Still, prosecutors offered her a deal, a chance to walk away and get her life together, plead guilty to manslaughter, serve 4 years, and get out. Wanda Jean took it, and in less than 2 years, she was out again. But nothing about her life got better. Behind bars, she had met Gloria, a woman with a temper and a past just as bloody. They clicked instantly, but when Wanda Jean got out in 1982, they drifted apart. However, by 1986, when Gloria was released, they found each other again, started dating, and even moved in together in 1988. But whatever spark had drawn them together quickly turned to friction. Gloria had her own demons. She served time for stabbing a woman to death, and she had racked up multiple arrests for assault. Their relationship was a roller coaster, full of love, anger, and fear. Police were called to the house again and again, for screaming matches, threats, and sometimes worse. But through it all, Wanda Jean stayed, and so did Gloria. Until the night everything snapped. After the shooting, Wanda Jean was booked and processed. Her court-appointed attorney had never handled a death penalty case before, not once. And when he found out the state planned to seek execution, he begged the judge for help, a second chair, a public defender, anyone with real experience. But the judge said no, and not only was his request denied, he was also told he couldn't withdraw from the case. There came no help, no experts, and he got just $800 to prepare a defense. That was all her family could get. The outcome, in many ways, was sealed right there. Wanda Jean wasn't coming into this trial with a clean slate. She was still on probation for killing Deidre Pettis years earlier, and that probably weighed heavily against her. On paper, she wasn't a scared woman acting in the heat of the moment anymore. She was a repeat offender with a violent past, and that was enough to change the entire tone of the case. Had this been her first arrest? Had Deidre's death not followed her into that courtroom, maybe the story would have played differently. Maybe the court might have viewed her as desperate or emotional. But Deidre was dead, and now Gloria was too. And the jury didn't see Wanda Jean as a woman trying to survive. They saw a woman who had already been given a second chance, and wasted it. Wanda Jean told the court she had acted in self-defense. She said Gloria came at her with a hand rake again, just like earlier that day. But police never found a rake. And Gloria's mother, who witnessed the shooting up close, said it didn't happen that way at all. The jury didn't believe Wanda Jean, and on April 27, 1989, they convicted her of first-degree murder, and she was sentenced to death. Years later, her legal team brought something else to the table. At her clemency hearing, they revealed Wanda Jean had taken an IQ test back in the 70s. And her score was just 69. This was low enough to qualify as intellectually disabled, and that one number could have changed everything. But there was a problem. At trial, Wanda Jean had lied. She claimed she graduated high school, said she had a certificate in medical assistance. But that wasn't true, and the prosecution used those lies against her. Said she wasn't mentally impaired, just manipulative. And even her own lawyer hadn't known. He didn't have the resources to dig into her past, and Wanda Jean likely didn't understand how badly those lies would hurt her. In the end, none of it mattered. The appeals were exhausted and the clock had run out. Wanda Jean spent the next 12 years on death row, and as the execution date closed in, she leaned into the only place left to go, faith. In her final months, she became a born-again Christian, and according to her spiritual advisor, she may have sought redemption not only for herself, but to connect with the world that had turned away from her. On January 11, 2001, Oklahoma carried out her execution. That day, 24 relatives of the victims stood in silence. Some had lost Gloria Leathers, others Deetra Pettis. Both were gone because of the same woman. And now they stood behind a tinted window, watching as the state carried out her sentence. Among them was LaToya, Gloria's daughter. She said Wanda's death wouldn't bring her mother back, but it was something. It would give the family closure. Wanda Jean didn't ask for a big last meal, just a simple bag of potato chips. And when the moment came, Wanda Jean lay on the gurney wearing a gray inmate shirt with a white sheet covering most of her body. She looked calm and kept her eyes open. A chaplain read aloud from the Bible, and when asked for her final words, Wanda Jean's voice was quiet but clear. "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do," she said, repeating the words of Jesus Christ on the cross. "That's it, thank you." Then she smiled at her attorney and stuck out her tongue, defiant to the end. At 9:21 p.m., she was pronounced dead. Wanda Jean Allen was 41 years old. She became the first black woman to be executed in the U.S. in over 50 years, and the first woman ever to be executed in the history of Oklahoma. And that same year, 2 more women were executed. Let's take a look at the next one in that lineup. After 12 years on Oklahoma's death row, Marilyn Kay Plantz was executed by lethal injection. But to understand how a church-going mother ended up on death row, we have to go back to a summer morning in 1988, when a burned-out pickup truck was found in a remote area in northeast Oklahoma City. On the evening of August 25, 1988, James Earl Plantz left for his overnight shift at the Daily Oklahoman. He was 33 years old, a working husband doing his best to support his wife and kids. At home, Marilyn Plantz tucked their 2 children, 9-year-old Trina and 7-year-old Christopher, into bed. The house was quiet, normal. But Marilyn already had a plan in motion. She wasn't alone that night. Hours earlier, she had picked up 17-year-old William Clifford Bryson and his friend Clinton McKimble. The 3 of them drove around for hours. Marilyn pulled money from her bank account, bought crack cocaine and beer, and waited for Jim to leave home for his night shift. And once he was gone, they returned to the house. The 2 men drank and smoked in the front room of the house while Marilyn took care of the children and went to bed around 10:30 p.m. But this wasn't the first time she had welcomed Clifford into her home. They had met sometime in late 1987 or early 1988. Marilyn was nearly twice his age, a married mother of 2. Clifford was a teenager, just 17, with little direction. But by spring, their relationship had turned sexual. While her husband worked late nights trying to provide for his family, Marilyn played hostess. She let Clifford drive her car, gave him money for booze or crack, and made space for him and his teenage friends like they owned the place. Their affair wasn't just reckless, it was dangerous. And it quickly spiraled into something darker. Marilyn wanted her husband dead, and Clifford was willing to help. Marilyn had told Clifford that Jim was abusive, that she was done, that she needed a way out, and that she was willing to kill for it. A divorce wouldn't give her what she wanted, because what she wanted was the $300,000 payout from Jim's life insurance policy. And to get that, he had to die. The plans came and went. First, Marilyn handed Clifford a gun and told him to use it, but instead of pulling the trigger, he pawned the weapon for cash. Then she came up with the idea of an ambush at the house, luring James home early while the boys waited inside. But that plan didn't work out either. Later, she suggested the idea of a fishing trip where the two men could shove Jim off the side of a boat and let the water do the rest. But that too never happened. Still, Marilyn kept pushing. And now another plan was underway. Just after 4 a.m., Jim returned home, groceries in hand, and whistling like it was just another morning, not knowing what was waiting for him in the kitchen. Clifford struck first, blindsiding him with a bat to the back of the head. James staggered and called out for Marilyn, but she never came. She stayed in the bedroom, waiting. Then Clinton joined in, and together they kept swinging until James collapsed on the floor. But he wasn't dead yet. He was still alive when they dragged his body outside and shoved him into the bed of his own pickup truck. That's when Marilyn finally stepped out. She looked at the battered man she had once married and said it was too messy. "His head's busted open. It's not going to look like an accident," she told them. "Burn him." And that's exactly what they did. Clifford and Clinton drove the pickup out to a deserted stretch of road. They pulled Jim's limp body into the cab, slumped behind the steering wheel, and tried to set the truck ablaze. Clinton lit a rag in the gas tank, but it didn't catch. So Clifford poured gasoline inside and around the vehicle and struck a match. The fire roared to life, and as they drove away, they looked back and saw something no one forgets. Jim was trying to sit up. He was still alive when the flames took him. Back at the house, Marilyn was already scrubbing the blood from the floor. She then told the men to strip out of their bloody clothes and change into her husband's, while she bagged the stained clothing in a sack. She told them to dump this bag far away from her house. She wanted no traces and no mistakes. But their night wasn't over. Still high and wired from the adrenaline, Clifford and Clinton stopped at a convenience store where they used the dead man's cash to buy sandwiches and drinks like it was any other night. Then they headed to a friend's house, Michael Kendrick's place. There, in a haze of casual bravado, they told Michael what they had done, laid it all out like it was no big deal. And when Michael asked about Marilyn's kids, Clifford said they were asleep just a few feet from where their father was beaten to death. Then Clifford picked up the phone and called Marilyn. She was fine, she said. She had already bought a new rug to hide the bloodstains. And before hanging up, Clifford told her what they both already knew. They had to stay close now. What began as a quiet morning ended with a burned body in a smoldering truck and a mother of two standing over a blood-stained floor, wiping away the evidence of a man she had once promised to love. This wasn't just murder. It was coordinated, planned, and brutally carried out by the person Jim trusted most. Hours later, at 5:15 a.m., firefighters found the burned-out pickup in a remote area in northeast Oklahoma City. The driver's door was wide open, and slumped behind the wheel was a man's body. His left foot lay flat against the pavement, stretched like he had tried to crawl out, but he didn't make it. The fire had nearly wiped away any trace of who he was, but dental records later confirmed the truth. It was James Earl Plantz. The investigation moved quickly, and Marilyn's affair with a 17-year-old didn't stay hidden for long. The story unraveled fast, and when questioned, Clifford was the first to break. He told police he had gone along with it because of the bruises. He had seen Marilyn with black eyes, and this made him angry. He also said he loved her. Maybe that was true, or maybe it was just easier than admitting he helped kill a man for cash. Marilyn had told a lot of people that Jim had threatened her life, that he said if she ever left, he would kill her and then himself. And at first, that story stuck. Even members of Jim's own family believed it. She painted herself as a woman living in fear, trapped in a marriage she couldn't escape. She said she had told Jim she wanted a divorce, but that he had responded with threats. That kind of talk left an impression on others, and for a while, it worked. Jim's family didn't want to think Marilyn had anything to do with it. She had always seemed so put together, so quiet. the kind of woman who sat in the same church pew every Sunday, Bible in hand and a soft smile on her face. Jim's sister even tried to hire a lawyer for her. They thought maybe Marilyn had been manipulated, or maybe she hadn't known the plan until it was too late. But that hope shattered when detectives revealed what they had found. Marilyn hadn't just been aware of the plan, she had been the one pulling the strings. She promised Clifford that as soon as Jim was out of the picture, they would cash in on his life insurance, leave Oklahoma, and start a new life together. She talked about marriage, even named the places they would go. It was all mapped out, cold and calculated. And that's when reality set in with Jim's family. Their loved one hadn't died in some tragic accident. He had been murdered, and the person behind it was his own wife. After the arrests, Clinton took a plea deal. He pleaded guilty and took a life sentence in exchange for testifying against Marilyn and Clifford, and he didn't hold anything back. On the stand, he gave the jury every ugly detail, the plans, the beatings, the fire, and Marilyn's role in it all. She hadn't just watched. She pushed it along, lit the match, and fueled the fire in every way but literal. When it came time to face trial, Marilyn and Clifford sat side by side, but when it came time to speak, they both stayed silent. No explanations, no apologies, nothing. But the jury saw right through them. They were both convicted. And in March 1989, Marilyn, once a Sunday school teacher, a wife, and a mother, was sentenced to death for planning the murder of her husband. Clifford, who turned 18 just 6 weeks before the murder, was sentenced to death too. He spent the next 11 years on death row. On June 15, 2000, Oklahoma carried out his execution. Clifford was 29. In his final statement, he looked toward the victim's family and said he was sorry. He told them he hoped they could find peace and move on with their lives. For his last meal, Clifford requested 10 fried shrimp, a salad, a strawberry drink, a slice of German chocolate cake, a pint of ice cream, and a hot apple fritter. For the same 12 years, Marilyn stayed in her cell and kept fighting, trying to shift the focus to the life that came before the crime. She blamed her childhood for what she had done, and eventually her family backed her up. During one of the trials, 3 of her sisters came forward, and each gave sworn statements that painted a bleak picture of their childhood. The 6 of them had grown up in a home marked by poverty and control, where their father ruled with a heavy hand. He was strict, angry, and quick to punish. They said the bruises weren't always visible, but the fear stuck around. And they didn't stop there. They talked about Jim too, how Marilyn had gone from one controlling home to another. They described him as jealous, harsh, and increasingly violent. To them, Marilyn never escaped the cycle and traded her father's shadow for her husband's. But no matter how many stories were told or how many wounds were reopened, it didn't change the outcome. At the clemency hearing, Marilyn asked for her death sentence to be commuted to a life sentence. She said she was deeply sorry for everything she had done. Her voice cracked as she spoke about the one thing that still gave her hope, her daughter Trina, who had only been 9 years old at the time of the crime. After years of silence, the two had finally reconnected. "It's hard for me to think about living the rest of my life in prison," Marilyn admitted. "But now I have a real reason to live." Trina sat just a few feet away, silently weeping, a tissue pressed tightly against her face. She didn't speak during the hearing, but a pre-recorded video played in her place. In it, her voice trembled. "I want the chance to forgive her," she said, "but I can't bear the thought of finally having a relationship with a mother I haven't seen in 13 years, only to watch her die in 3 weeks. That makes me cringe." But the decision stood, and the board's 4-0 vote moved her closer to becoming the second woman executed in Oklahoma. She had her last meal on Monday, April 29th, 2 days before the execution. She requested a chicken taco salad, a Mexican pizza, 2 enchiritos, 2 chicken soft tacos, cinnamon twists, a slice of pecan pie, and 2 cans of Coca-Cola, her last comfort before the needle. On May 1st, 2001, she was strapped to the gurney. She didn't cry, didn't beg. Instead, she leaned into the faith she had clung to in her final years. Her voice was steady, almost calm, when she said, "I want to tell all of my family that I love them very much, especially Trina and Chris," she said. "What God has given me is love, and I have overcome the world. And I just want y'all to know that nothing, absolutely nothing, can separate us from the love of God." Then she looked toward her family and added one final message: "If you all want to see me again, you must be born again." She didn't apologize for what she had done to her husband, and she never expressed any regret, not for the murder and not for the plan she helped set in motion. After the execution began, her chest moved slightly, and she made a few short snorting sounds, but then went still. 3 minutes after her final words, at 9:11 p.m., she was pronounced dead. Marilyn Kay Plantz was 40 years old. Let's take a look at the next and last woman executed in Oklahoma. After spending 19 years on death row, Lois Nadean Smith, also known as Mean Nadine, was executed by lethal injection in Oklahoma. But to understand how a 42-year-old woman ended up there, we have to go back to the 4th of July in 1982. Early that morning, 20-year-old Cynthia Lucille Bailey, also known as Cindy, was staying in a motel in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. She got a call from her ex-boyfriend, James Gregory Smith, and he told her that he wanted to meet. According to him, there had been misunderstandings, things they needed to clear up. Cindy agreed, thinking it was just going to be a conversation. But when the car pulled up, James wasn't alone. His mother, Lois Nadean Smith, was behind the wheel, and a woman named Teresa Baker sat in the back. At first, nothing seemed too strange, but as they drove, the tone in the car changed fast. Small talk turned into sideways questions, then accusations. Then Nadine turned in her seat, her voice rising with each word, and said something that caught Cindy off guard. She claimed Cindy had tried to have Greg killed. Cindy denied it, confused, then scared. She told her it wasn't true, over and over. But Nadine wasn't interested in denial, and the more Cindy spoke, the angrier she became. And then it exploded. Without warning, she turned back around, lunged forward, and wrapped her hands around Cindy's throat. Cindy fought to breathe, gasping and struggling, but Nadine wasn't done. She was just getting started. She grabbed a knife out of Cindy's own purse and drove it into her neck. Blood poured as the car kept going, and no one else moved or stopped her. And instead of calling for help or even slowing down, they just kept driving. A short while later, the car rolled into Gans, Oklahoma, and pulled up outside a trailer that belonged to Nadine's ex-husband, Jim Smith, Greg's father. Jim was home with his new wife, Robin. But as soon as Robin sensed something was wrong, she stepped outside and left. She didn't want to be part of whatever was about to happen. Inside the trailer, the mood turned colder. Nadine forced Cindy into a recliner, waving a pistol like the whole thing was some twisted performance. She paced in front of her, barking threats and feeding off the fear. Then she pulled the trigger. The first missed, slamming into the chair near Cindy's head. A warning, maybe, but what came next wasn't. Nadine fired over and over, hitting Cindy in the head and the chest 5 times. Cindy immediately dropped to the floor, bleeding and clinging to life. But that didn't stop them. While she lay there, Greg reloaded the gun while Nadine jumped on Cindy's neck, stomping her down with both feet as if the bullets hadn't done enough. And the worst part? She was laughing while doing it. Then, when the gun was ready again, she grabbed it back from Greg and fired 4 more shots straight into Cindy's head and back. No hesitation, no mercy. Afterward, they dragged her into the bedroom and placed the gun in her hand, trying to make it look like a suicide. Then they got in the car and left her there, bleeding out on the cold, dirty floor like she was nothing. But how did it get this far? How did a devoted mother become capable of something so brutal? Lois Nadean Dodd was born in 1940 in northeastern Oklahoma to a family that didn't believe in soft landings. The full details of her childhood are hazy, but locals remembered one thing. She was mean. Mean enough to earn a nickname by her teenage years. Mean Nadine. And it wasn't just a joke, it was a warning, and that name would follow her like a shadow. She married young to a man named Jim Smith and eventually became the mother of a boy who would grow up to be the center of her universe. James Gregory Smith. Greg was her only child, and she would do anything for him. And while most mothers are protective, Nadine took it further. By the time she was in her mid-40s, she was drinking hard, talking louder than everyone else, and keeping an iron grip on anything that threatened her boy. In Salisaw, no one challenged her, not if they wanted peace. But when the rumors started, whispers that Greg was caught up in stolen guns and drug deals, Nadine didn't brush it off. Greg was just 19 at the time, angry, reckless, and knee-deep in a mess he couldn't climb out of. And tied to him was a young woman named Cindy Bailey. She was just 20 years old, but already worn down by addiction, motel hopping, and raising a child alone. She and Greg had spiraled together fast, and when it ended ugly. By the time they broke up, leaving her son heartbroken, Nadine had already made up her mind. She hated Cindy, and when someone whispered that Cindy wanted Greg dead, that was all she needed. There was no evidence, just street talk. But for Nadine, that was all it took. She didn't question it, didn't wait. That rumor became her truth, and that truth demanded action. And she didn't keep it to herself either. She told people, bragged even, said Cindy needed to be put in her place, said someone ought to teach her a lesson. It stopped being just anger and started sounding like a plan. And still, no one stepped in. No one warned Cindy. No one thought Nadine would go through with it. But she did. By the time Cindy climbed into that car on July 4th, it was already done. The target was locked, and the decision was made. On July 5th, Cindy's body was found inside the trailer of Nadine's ex-husband. Neighbors had heard the gunshots, but had waited. It wasn't until later that someone finally called the police. And when investigators arrived, the pieces fell into place fast. Multiple witnesses remembered Cindy leaving the motel with Nadine, Greg, and another woman, and some even described the car. A man in Jim's neighborhood told officers he saw that same car parked outside the trailer on the 4th, and another neighbor said they had heard a woman screaming. Investigators immediately had their suspects, and Nadine, Greg, and their friend were all brought in. But when they brought Nadine in for questioning, she didn't blink. She didn't cry. She didn't twist the story to make herself look better. Instead, she leaned in across the table and told them everything. "Yes, I shot her," she said flatly, without a trace of remorse in her voice. "She was going to have my son killed. She wouldn't stop." And it didn't come out like an apology, more like a justification. Greg sat beside his mother and told investigators the truth. He had been there too, and not just as a witness, but as an accomplice. He admitted that during the shooting, he reloaded the pistol for her, handed it back, and never once tried to stop her. Soon after, police recovered the .22 caliber revolver, along with empty shell casings and blood-stained clothes. It all lined up. There was no puzzle left to piece together, no mystery to solve, no need for forensic tests or long interviews. They had confessions, they had the weapon, and they had a timeline backed by the two people who ended Cindy's life. So less than 48 hours after Cindy's murder, Nadine and Greg were arrested. Sequoyah County had never seen anything like it. A mother and son arrested in record time for one of the most vicious killings in the state's recent history. And while other cases crawled through the courts for years, this one moved fast, because there was nowhere else for it to go. By 1983, the prosecution didn't need to prove that Nadine pulled the trigger. She had already admitted that. What they had to show was that this wasn't a moment of spontaneous rage, but that it was planned. A slow build of anger and obsession that ended with Cindy bleeding out on a recliner in a trailer in Gans. And with every word Nadine gave them, every piece of evidence, and every witness willing to testify, that narrative only got stronger. The pictures were brutal. Cindy's body was covered in bruises, with 9 bullet wounds and a deep gash across her neck that looked like someone had tried to silence her in the most desperate way. The autopsy confirmed what Cindy never had the chance to say. She had been shot 5 times in the chest, twice in the head, and once in the back. Any one of those could have ended her life. And the knife wound, deliberate, forceful, and deep, could have done the same. Nadine's defense team pleaded for mercy. They argued that she acted out of fear, that Cindy was a threat to her son Greg. They pointed out that Nadine had no prior criminal record and tried to frame her as a mother doing what she thought she had to do to protect her child. Greg also took the stand, and his testimony was torn between loyalty and guilt. He admitted he helped, he reloaded the gun, but also claimed he honestly believed his mother was trying to save him. But the jury didn't see it that way. After hours of deliberation, they found Nadine guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced her to death. Jim and Teresa were arrested too, though their exact sentences aren't publicly known. Greg was convicted as an accomplice and sentenced to life. He served 27 years before being paroled in 2009. But his freedom didn't last long. Less than 2 years later, Greg, now going by James, was back in prison, this time for a drug charge. It wasn't violent, but it was serious enough to send him back. He stayed locked up until April 2011, and once he got out, he disappeared. For the next 3 years, he was off the radar. Then, in 2014, police in Montana arrested him again, this time on kidnapping and assault charges. That August, Kathleen Mitchell boarded a bus out of Oklahoma, but she didn't leave by choice. She was fleeing for her life. The domestic violence shelter in Tahlequah had helped her escape after her ex-boyfriend, James Gregory Smith, beat her and threatened her life. But by October 9th, he had already tracked her down. Across state lines, hundreds of miles away in Bozeman, Montana, James found her and took control all over again. For nearly 2 months, Kathleen was held against her will in a motel room. She was isolated, beaten, and constantly threatened. She feared for her own life and for the safety of her children. Eventually, she couldn't take it anymore. She waited until James fell asleep and quietly called 911. When the dispatcher picked up, all she whispered was, "Help me." And when the police showed up, she begged them to put her in their patrol car and not leave her behind. That day, James was arrested. But Montana wasn't the only place that wanted him. Back in Oklahoma, he was already a wanted man for violating parole. Now he faced up to 10 years in prison for kidnapping, though records don't make it clear how much time he actually served, or whether he was ever returned to Oklahoma to face consequences there for violating parole. Meanwhile, Nadine had already entered death row at the Mabel Bassett Correctional Center, and for the next 19 years, she fought through one appeal after another, arguing that her nickname had biased the jury, that her confession wasn't fair, and that she wasn't mentally competent. But every court denied her claims, including the U.S. Supreme Court. And in the end, a date was set. And on the evening of December 4th, 2001, Nadine was strapped to the gurney. For her last meal, she had requested barbecue ribs, onion rings, strawberry banana cake, and a cherry lemonade. When the time came, her last words were soft but steady. "To the family, I want to say I'm sorry for all the pain I caused you," she said. "Please forgive me. You must forgive to be forgiven." Then she added, "To live is Christ, to die is gain. Thank you, Jesus." Inside the witness chamber, Cindy's daughter, Brandy Fields, sat beside her husband, a family friend, and an aunt. She listened as the woman who had taken her mother's life asked for forgiveness. Afterward, Brandy spoke through tears. "If she really meant it, you have to forgive even though it's very hard and it doesn't help me at all," she said. "It does a little bit, but it doesn't bring back my mom." Her voice cracked. "I wish she thought of this before she did what she did. We wouldn't be in this position." And yet for Brandy, it wasn't truly over. Not while Greg still had parole hearings ahead. "I'm glad this part of it is over, because I don't ever have to hear that she's got clemency or is going to stay the rest of her remaining life in prison. She's got what the court handed down to her." At 9:13 p.m., just 2 minutes after the drugs were administered, Nadine was pronounced dead. Lois Nadean Smith was 61 years old. Nadine had been the first woman sentenced to death in Oklahoma after the reinstatement of capital punishment. But in the end, she became the last woman the state executed. That concludes all women executed in Oklahoma. If you liked this video, make sure to check out the next one, because just when you thought it couldn't get worse, well, it can. And the next cases are even more disturbing.